Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the Cornerstone Care Solutions and Acuity Law webinar, Navigating the Business of Care. We're delighted to come together as two organisations working hard in the health and social care sector to deliver information to providers about best practice, things that you should be looking out on, horizon scanning, and what we've put together today is a really practical talk on lots of different aspects of your care provisions. Our opinion is that it's better to be forewarned than forearmed. Having a knowledge of things that could crop up unexpectedly will better prepare you for crisis. So together, we've gathered our crack team, who I'm happy to introduce. All have taken the time to join us today. Arrogantly, I'm going to start with myself. I'm Jenny Wild. I'm a partner in Acuity's Health and Social Care Regulatory Department. We have Juliet Franklin, who's a legal director in our employment law team, Sabina Causa, partner in the immigration law team, and we're delighted to be joined by Lucy Corner and Charlie Light, the MD and operations manager of Cornerstone Care Solutions. We're each going to go through our respective specialisms, offering you practical advice and tips and a little bit of anecdotal tasters so that you can be as prepared as possible for crisis. We're starting off with Lucy and Charlie, who are going to be going through the indicators of failing care. We will then move on to Sabina, who's going to cover international recruitment in the health and social care sector, a very hot topic at the moment. Juliet will then step in with effective management of grievances, complaints, and concerns in social care. And then I will round things off with a bit of a free flow discussion on the impact of the CQC single assessment framework and the drama around that. So what I had planned is going to look slightly different, but we'll get there at the end. So I'm going to hand over now to Lucy and Charlie, their very informative piece on failing care.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome and nice to see everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial and clinical KPIs that we often tell care homes that they should have in place. So a lot of people forget the quality assurance requirements in a care home and making sure that they monitor the environment to see whether or not their care that they're providing is good or whether it's starting to fail. So we tend to go into failing care homes and help sort them out and turn them around. And we put these slides together based on some really key things that we've found at the moment that providers are failing in, and where local authorities are focusing at the moment. So hopefully this will be useful for you. So just some brief stats here to show that some of the highest instances of symptoms that people experience across the board are mostly respiratory and due to infections. So infections are a huge issue in care homes, and we will remember from COVID, this is a big problem that needed managing. So one of the things that we try and put into the care homes that we manage is looking at infection control measures and making sure that the care homes are managing those things properly. Everyone had a crash course in that in COVID, so hopefully most people are aware of the way that things should work. The reason that needs to be done is to make sure that obviously infections are prevented, but also we need to be monitoring those infections. So when you have somebody prescribed antibiotics, for example, it's really good practice for you to watch who is prescribed them and how often, so that you can tailor their care to look at those things. So although we can do these things to prevent the infections in the first place, it's really good practice to be monitoring those outcomes to see whether or not the same people are repeatedly getting infections, and therefore be able to tailor the care specifically to those people. So that's quite important. Another thing that we come across in care homes really regularly is falls. Again, some people don't monitor falls, or they might monitor accidents and incidents, but they don't look at trends, and they don't look at the environment, and they don't look at things that they could put in place to make sure that people are safe when it comes to falls. So not only are we looking at monitoring them, but we're looking at assessing the environment and making sure that it's not cluttered, people are wearing fitting footwear, the chairs and rugs and things in people's rooms are in a safe position, or taped or secured so that people don't end up tripping. So managing falls is really important, and making sure that staff training, the environment, monitoring those falls is all very important. And a lot of people forget that certain conditions such as dementia, people can suffer from something called sundowning, which is at the end of the day, they become a bit more tired, and they can end up having an increased falls. So that's really important as well, to make sure that's monitored. Something else that's it's one of the first things that we look at in a care home. So if we're not really sure of the service, we don't know much about them, we will try and look at the weight logs of the residents, because this is a really interesting measure that will show us whether or not people are losing weight or whether they're gaining weight, and that can indicate lots of issues with things like nutrition, whether staff are prompting people to eat, whether residents are forgetting to eat, and all sorts of things that can lead into their specific care. So we find it really important to have a look at the weight logs, and then to implement some measures if we feel that people are not getting the meals that they need. So some of that might just be reminding, some of it might be fortifying the food to make sure it has the right nutritional value so that people put weight on. But also, don't forget, some people put weight on, and there are also mental health issues where people don't have that satiated feeling from food. So there's also people that we need to be managing their intake the other way and making sure that they're not putting too much weight on. So that leads us on to bowel management. This one is a big one in the Midlands that we're seeing at the moment, with local authorities being very funny about bowel management and looking at bowel charts. My advice would be to review all of your residents for people that need bowel monitoring, and put a specific care plan in place for anyone that you think might need that. So if somebody's independent and they don't have any risk factors with bowel care, then make sure it's in their care plan that they don't need to have that monitoring. We're finding care homes being challenged quite significantly because care records don't show that bowels have been monitored, and therefore local authorities and CQC are therefore taking that as somebody not having a bowel movement for 7, 8, 9 days, and therefore they think that these people are constipated. So it's really important to manage bowel care and to make sure people have got the right hydration, and that people that do need to have their bowel care measured, it is being done. The staff are assisting them with that, and also looking at things that will improve their bowel care and putting these things in the care plan. So making sure their hydration routine, their diet, medication reviews. If they're on bowel medication, then they probably should be on a bowel chart. So that's one thing that you can go through all of your residents' care plans and check. So the key takeaways for the clinical KPIs, Charlie is going to talk to us about the financial ones, is that depending on the type of residency you have in your care home, it's really important for you to look at the type of care that they need. So if you have a high abundance of people with dementia, I would recommend it really important to look at the types of issues that people with dementia come up with. So that would be some of the things we've spoken about today with falls, bowel habits, and nutrition. And obviously with people with mental health, you've got things like behavior, and perhaps nutrition as well, other things like that. So look at your client group, make sure that you've got a quality assurance system in place that measures those KPIs, and get in touch with us if you want any help in doing so. I'll pass you over to Charlie.
Hello, good morning. I'm happy to be here. So I get the exciting job of going through financial KPIs, which we all love. So, financial KPIs, although they appear to be a spreadsheet, they're numbers, they're essential in the leadership of a care home. Bad and poor finance management and not noticing those red flags and indicators can really put a care home in distress. You could have the fantastic care, the residents striving in their environment, but financial issues can really fail a care home quite quickly. Part of Cornerstone's work and what we do is go into homes that go into administration due to financial difficulties. So we go in when a care home is in distress financially, and you may see that the care is absolutely amazing, but unfortunately the home is now at risk, and that's due to poor finance management. So we're just going to go through some areas that covers that. So one of the things that we always look at as an indicator is what are our occupancy rates. So a lot of the time what you'll see when homes are failing, or it's an indicator they're failing, is there's a clear decline in occupancy rates. Now that could also interlink with what Lucy was on about earlier around infections, falls, because you know what it's like with people, whether they're elderly, with LD, falls and infections can just decline their health moving forward, which ultimately will drop your occupancy. The implications of this is massive at the moment, especially with the funding streams from the local authorities. It's decreased revenue. It indicates reputational damage. People aren't going to go in if they're thinking, well, why have you got 20 beds available in this climate? And it can lead to cash flow issues. We need the money coming in order to pay for good staffing, good environment, and enhancing the care for people. What we can do, there's plenty we can do with occupancy. It's not always easy, but there is a lot we can do. We can look at our target audience, and then we can also analyse competitive landscapes across our geographical area, depending on which location your care homes are. We can develop a strong brand identity, let people know what you're about and what you can offer with your place in your care homes, not just that we can meet the care needs. What is your unique selling point? And utilise marketing channels. Social media is massive now, but you can still also go to your local GPs, local dentist, health services where people visit daily, and put a brochure in. Just really think about your area and how you can market that at a low cost, obviously, to yourselves. Prioritise the patient care. When you're looking at occupancy, don't take someone just for occupancy. Make sure they meet the needs of your service and they're going to gel with the rest of the residents and your clientele in your home. Always implement quality improvement initiatives. Quality is essential. If you have high quality, your occupancy will follow. Just get your name out there, make sure you market your home and be part of the community. People really want their loved ones to go in somewhere that is transparent in their community. Fees. Now that's a big one. We would love fees to be what we need to and what we want, but we know the difficulties we have with local authorities and their increases in fees annually. We know that we get very low market fees for what we need to offer and what we need to staff for that. There is going to be difficulty covering the costs, especially around training, which is massive now, because we've come out of the kind of COVID era where online training was essential and we didn't need to actually do face-to-face, but now we're back to putting that back in our budgets, which will have an implication. And it's also it's mismanagement of funds a lot of the time when it comes to fees. So if you have a resident and their care is changing, you do have the right to go to the local authority and say, this person's needs have changed. They now have a diagnosis of dementia. We need to look at an additional fee increase for this person, or this person requires additional one-to-one to be able to socialise so they get a better quality of life. If the needs change, it's our responsibility in care to go to the local authorities and say, we need more staffing hours, we need more fees for this person, rather than accepting. A lot of time what you'll see is homes will just accept this is the weekly fee and that's it, but we can challenge that. Looking at your fee analysis, that goes hand in hand with requesting more fees. We need to look at analysing the cost structure, creating a clear and concise fee structure. You do have the local authority fees and the CCG and ICB and all these people that say this is what we pay. But remember, that is a negotiating amount depending on the level of need of your resident. Okay, so make sure you challenge around fees. Staff turnaround recruitment, massive in care. That's always going to be a concern, but we can try and minimise the areas. So we look at low staff morale, burnout or dissatisfaction. Main thing, take care of your staff, offer incentives and make them feel valued. That's the main thing. And then make sure you have a really clear recruitment process. And I know that we're talking about kind of international recruitment and things later on. So it's really essential that we look at supporting our staff, no matter what role they're in and how long they've been with us. So our key areas to take away from the finances. we need to address any financial red flag that crops up. If something doesn't look right or we start to lose profit, we need to look at why. Always conduct a thorough financial analysis. Make sure you're checking your management accounts. Make sure you're checking your P&Ls. That's essential, so you can check it monthly, weekly, daily if need be. Don't leave it until you're 6 months, 7 months down the line. And also prioritise your staff and retention. If you get that right, you haven't got the additional cost of agency and the additional cost of recruitment. So look after your staff and get that right, and they'll stay and reduce your costs. So conclusion. Monitoring both clinical and financial KPIs come hand in hand. You can't monitor one without the other, because both will have a serious impact on reducing the care in your service and reducing the ability to care. So our final takeaway, and I know that numbers are numbers, but they're key. So take a data-driven approach. You need those numbers to make sense of what you're actually providing. And again, Cornerstone offer a lot of support. We're used to services where financially they're failing, and it's normally the little things we can do to fix it. All right, Jenny, back to you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That's so helpful. I think that it can feel awkward to talk about money sometimes when discussing care, but there's a direct correlation between financial difficulty and quality of care. Standards can slip, and if you can get that sorted, then it goes a very long way. And I know that Cornerstone have seen a number of cases where people have struggled. So it's good anecdotal advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us on nicely to my colleague Sabina. Sabina is, as I said, partner in our immigration department, and she's going to run us through ethical international recruitment of healthcare workers in the social care sector. So over to you, Sabina.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. So I think this topic follows on nicely from what Lucy and Charlie have been speaking to us about. I think there's a direct link between having the correct workforce and the quality of care that we're able to provide. As it stands, there's approximately 165,000 vacancies in adult social care because of a skills shortage within the UK that we're looking to fill. And we're still heavily reliant, as we have been historically, on recruiting internationally. And with that come a lot of issues in terms of making sure that we conduct ethical recruitment. And the idea is not about just securing the employees on a short-term basis, but then being able to retain that staff on a long-term basis. So with regards to the vacancies, a lot of it is to do with high turnover rates, just as explained by Charlie earlier, and due to the high demand because of the aging population. And therefore, it's really important to make sure when we are recruiting that we're getting it right. Previously, before Brexit, the law allowed for free movement for European nationals to enter into the UK workforce and work in the UK without having to secure a work visa. But since Brexit, all the European nationals now also have to follow what's called the points-based system, which applies to the EU and other parts of the world. And this imposes some restrictions and requirements that have to be met in order to ensure that we're getting the right workers entering into the UK. Now, like I said, the quality of care is affected by the standard of the employees that we're taking on, and this will lead to issues of burnout, high workloads and stress, etc. And therefore, when we're recruiting, not just internationally, but nationally, domestically, we need to make sure that that stuff is looked after and it's all done properly. Now, with regards to the points-based system, what's been introduced is the healthcare worker and the skilled worker visa. And what would apply to our care homes are the healthcare worker visas. And a lot of you are probably familiar with this in terms of stuff that you're taking on. Because the care workers, in terms of the UK's skilled worker programme, fall into maybe the lower paid job categories, it's really challenging to recruit workers into these positions and making sure that we are offering them the right level of salaries to be able to meet the legal requirements and being able to ensure that we're then able to retain staff as we go forward. And one of the things we want to link that to is ethical recruitment. So I'm going to expand on these, but the main principles that we're looking at are transparency, ensuring that there's no additional recruitment fees, supporting and protecting employees, and making sure that the recruitment that is taking place is in line with what the global requirements are. So first of all, if we look at let's say the recruitment fees. So normally what happens is, as a care home, or if you've got vacancies, you'd approach a recruitment agency to assist you to secure. It's really important that these recruitment agencies are vetted properly, because you may, as a care home, be paying a fee in order to then for them to assist you to recruit workers. But what's happening so often is they are then charging. It might not be them themselves, but if they're using an agent in a third country in order to recruit workers, they may be charging an additional fee, and that's not right. So the workers really should only be liable to paying the Home Office fees and the immigration house surcharge fee if it's applicable to them. There shouldn't be any additional fees payable to agents or recruitment agencies. And therefore, the solution to this problem is to make sure that we are vetting the recruitment agencies that we're using and ensuring that they are compliant with the requirements. This is, I guess, an issue for a wider UK-wide, or an issue for the government, in terms of a lot of the workers that we're taking on, they seem to come from the same countries. So there's a small amount of countries where we get our care workers from. And whilst it's great that we're able to fill the skills shortage in the UK, what that effectively means long term in the other countries, they then face that skills shortage and have what's called brain drain. So what could be the solution for that, or what key type of thing to introduce probably would be some agreements or skills development programs to ensure that obviously we're taking workers from the third countries, but there are activities and programs in place in order to ensure that there's not that damage caused to the workforce of the country that we are recruiting from. I think one of the key things, and Charlie mentioned this earlier, is retention of staff and making sure that your staff's looked after. And whilst my talk today is in relation to international recruitment, and the focus is making sure that we're able to retain that staff, the retention applies to all staff, and it's not about having let's say, more favorable terms for your international workers. Is actually making sure that they have the same terms of your workers that are actually already in the UK and are recruited domestically. And key things that can happen in order to assist retention, because what happens is a lot of workers are entering the UK, care workers are entering the UK, and due to lack of support and changes in the jobs that they weren't expecting, they are moving to different care providers. And in order to ensure you're able to retain staff, because the whole idea is that it's not a short-term solution, you're looking for staff that's able to support your organization long-term, is to create programs, onboarding, other support, maybe language support, maybe mentoring, and having a clear path to be able to demonstrate how they're able to progress with your organization. And if your staff is looked after, and like I said, this is not just your international staff, but just making sure we're recruiting ethically and we're providing the support they need, it will ensure that long term you're able to retain that staff. And again, this links directly back to quality of care. So in terms of agencies, I spoke about this earlier, it's really important to make sure you vet the agencies that you're using to ensure that they are not charging additional fees to the applicants, because there's a lot of displaced workers entering the UK where agencies have taken fees, but unfortunately there's no more jobs for these workers once they actually enter the UK, and the agencies aren't held accountable. And I guess that far down the line, it's not possible to be able to do that. But as recruiters, as employers, it's really important that when you use an agency, you make sure that you've done all of your checks, and you know that the workers you are taking on have knowledge of what their contracts are, what the fees are that they're liable for. Maybe have that direct contact with the employee once you've had the introduction from the recruiter, just to make sure that everything's clear cut and there's no additional fees, etc., being paid, especially if you are already paying the agency in order to recruit the workers for you. So trying to align ethical recruitment with the legal requirements as well, because it's often quite difficult. The points-based system has a minimum salary threshold, and I know when the rates went up, it didn't align with what the rates were being paid to national workers, and a lot of clients have confirmed that they've had to change the rate to be able to meet the minimum salary threshold. So they've had to change it for all of the employees, and that's really important, making sure that any salary thresholds that you're meeting for the migrant worker, for the international worker, is the same as your existing employees that you have. And I guess it's quite often very difficult when you have to meet salary thresholds, and especially in care work, if the salaries are slightly lower, trying to attract candidates and making sure that they have the specific qualifications that you need. Therefore, it's a fine balance of making sure you're able to offer the right fees to them. A long term, there is a lot going on in terms of challenging some of the policies that are in place, but it just maybe some adjustment in terms of immigration policies by the UK to ensure that there's other pathways for skilled workers to enter and to be able to meet the requirements without having such stringent guidelines where salaries or qualifications are looked at on their own, but not really considering experience or the other qualities that applicants are able to bring. As employers, it's really important to make sure, if you've been able to secure a sponsorship license from the UKVI, that you're making sure that you are compliant with your obligations. So when you get your sponsor license, it's not just about the immigration or about the document keeping. There's a requirement for you to make sure that you are acting in line with the rest of the legal requirements in the UK, and that could be business law requirements, it could be employment law requirements, and obviously immigration requirements, health regulation requirements. So it's your job to make sure that on your part you're doing everything properly. Quite often it could lead to civil penalties if it's shown that you are it will affect your license itself if you're not able to show compliance, but if it shows that you are involved in some type of recruitment whereby you were breaking the law in terms of additional fees through the agents that we're using, etc., then there could be civil penalties that apply to your organization. So you should try to make sure that you are aware of what your compliance requirements are, and also make sure, if you're not sure, get your legal representatives involved, maybe have some trial audits carried out just to ensure that you're on the right lines and you're compliant with the requirements. And just to wrap it up, long-term for sustainability, direct quality of care, training and integration are all key things to make sure that you have got a workforce that is able to support you long-term, and make sure that you're able to offer the quality of care that is actually required within your care homes. I think we will always have requirement for international recruitment, and the vacancies that are available at the moment clearly demonstrate that it's been a historic issue and it will carry on for a long time. And it's really important to make sure that to retain the actual correct workers that you need, and to be able to make sure you meet the quality requirement with CQC, that you're attracting and supporting you're attracting and supporting the right international care workers in your organization. If there's anything that you have questions about in relation to what I've spoken about, then feel free to leave the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. That's really helpful. There's a lot of information there. But as Sabina said, there is a Q&A section. Please feel free to ask your questions and we will endeavour to answer them at the end of the presentation. In addition, we will be circulating all of these really detailed slides after the webinar today, so don't worry. We're moving on to Juliet Franklin, who I invite to take control, and she's going to be talking us through the effective management of grievances and complaints and concerns in social care.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this fascinating webinar. I've certainly learned a lot this morning. As Jenny says, I'm going to touch Very briefly on the issue of effective management of grievances, complaints and concerns, which kind of really sort of bring together many of the points that have already been made this morning, that actually if we get the management of our staff right, then hopefully that in turn leads to a longer term successful business. So, where to start on a subject I could probably talk about all day, but I will leave this at 10 minutes, I promise. I think the first point is to manage grievances, complaints and concerns at an early stage. And I think all too often, we as employers, we as service providers, we as managers of organisations such as care homes, are quite fearful of grievances. We're quite fearful of complaints and concerns because we see them as a problem. We see them as something that's going to be a headache, it's going to take up management time, it's going to take up management cost, we're going to have disgruntled employees, and so on and so forth. But actually, if we get on board with the concerns that are being raised at an early stage, we can actually view these quite positively. Bear with me, it is true. But if we proactively identify the issues at an early stage, and we are aware of potential grievance, complaints and concerns early, we can actually nip quite a few of these issues in the bud. And I think sometimes grievances become a much bigger issue than they need to be because we don't actually take control of them at an early stage. We don't actually take time to listen or understand, or we become incredibly defensive. And if we do that, then that grievance, complaint and concern that could be managed quite easily becomes a much bigger beast and becomes much more difficult to curtail, to keep in control, to resolve. And what we then see is that it has problems in all these other areas that we've talked about this morning. So I would say make sure that you are training your managers to recognise signs of discontent and approach employees with empathy. So if you have the employee who's always been a really brilliant performer, but all of a sudden their performance is taking a dip, or they've never had a sick day in their entire service with you, but now they appear to be intermittently absent, get involved early, ask if there's an issue, because quite often what we see is that performance and attendance impact come from dissatisfaction in the workplace. An early intervention can de-escalate these tensions and prevent those formal grievances, complaints and concerns further down the line. And what we often find is that people just want to be listened. They just want somebody to hear them and hear their concern. And not many people, some, I accept, but not many people want to get into a full-blown contentious grievance procedure. They just want somebody to hear their concerns, know that they are being treated empathetically, and that those concerns are then being addressed. And quite often as well, what we see as part of these processes is that if an employee has a concern about the way something's being run or the way they're being treated, then that probably may be a concern of more than that one individual person. And actually, if we identify that at an early stage, we can prevent these bigger issues that then become a drain on management time and resource, and then may eventually feed into all these other concerns that we've heard about today, such as staff leaving, difficulty in recruiting, that then having a negative impact on how many beds you have available, and so on and so forth. So I would always actively encourage people to have informal conversations at an early stage to prevent formal grievances, complaints and concerns further down the line. And so this idea of a good communication culture, fostering openness and trust, really can't be underestimated. If we encourage staff to raise issues as soon as possible, they may be telling us something we weren't aware of, and we can nip it in the bud, we can get it sorted, and the rot doesn't set in. If that doesn't happen though, if we can't intervene at an early stage, or we intervene at an early stage but the person is quite clear that this needs to go through a more formal process, what I've set out on the next couple of slides are a couple of do's and don'ts when managing those processes, because again, what we all too often see is an issue that could be addressed sensibly as part of a grievance or a whistleblowing procedure actually become a much bigger issue, because when we manage that process, we don't manage it well, and then it becomes a complaint about the process as well as a complaint about the complaint. So do make sure that you have appropriate policies. I think that's the first, and hopefully anybody who is managing a care home business, as Jenny always tells me, it's a secrecy requirement. Make sure you have an active and an up-to-date grievance procedure, whistleblowing procedure, health and safety procedure, and so on and so forth. But as I say, make sure that your policies are regularly monitored, reviewed, and updated. I often think of policies as a piece of lovely cheese. If we leave it in the fridge and we don't take any care of it, it very quickly becomes stale and mouldy, and is no use to us whatsoever. So do make sure it's not just about having a policy, it's about then implementing and addressing that policy going forward. We can all have them. It takes a much better management structure to actually adhere to them. Third point now on the slide, empower your stakeholders to raise genuine concerns in the appropriate way. Again, as I said earlier, I think all too often we see complaints, we see concerns, we see grievances as a negative. I think if we can actually encourage people and give them the power to raise these concerns, as I've already said, they may be bringing to our attention something we're not already aware of, and actually if we can nip it in the bud quite quickly, it prevents that becoming a much bigger problem, which then lead into the issues that have already been talked about this morning. And provide HR training to appropriate workers and managers. Again, I think all too often as employers, we have employees that are good at what they do. They're good at what we recruited them for. And then hopefully, as Sabina touched on, these employees have a career path. They want to progress, they want to improve, they want to seek promotion. But what we have to remember is that when we put people into promoted roles, not the role they were recruited for, we're then asking them to engage with a whole different skill set that they probably have never done before. They've never managed anybody, they've never dealt with conflict, they've never dealt with a grievance. So make sure that you are providing training to appropriate workers to recognise these issues that we've talked about and to address them properly. A couple more do's. Do prepare. Do understand the issues, have the facts ready, anticipate emotional responses, and be clear on the desired outcome. So if we're going to go into a meeting with somebody to discuss the concerns that they've raised, make sure we understand what it is they've raised. Make sure that we have got from them all of the facts that we need to appropriately and properly address those concerns. And the final point there, so be clear on the desired outcome. I think all too often we go into these processes thinking somebody wants conflict, or they want compensation, or they want somebody else to be disciplined. It's all kind of seen as very acrimonious and negative. Actually, if you ask somebody what they need, in most cases, they just want to be treated fairly. They just want things to be put right. So actually, if we listen to what the desired outcome is, it might be something that isn't going to just work for that individual employee, but will work for your home as a whole. Remain impartial and actively listen. I think the best way to defend is to attack is all too often the case. Is we don't want to be told that something might not be right if it's our baby, or if it's a policy or a procedure that we've implemented. So I think all too often we will try and shut down the concerns that are being raised. When actually, if we listen to them, it might not be about doing things differently. It might just be about doing them better. Be empathetic. Acknowledge the emotional weight of the conversation, but as I say, that remain professional. This is not about apologising for apologising's sake. It's not about taking everything at face value. People will raise concerns that are unjustified, that have no merit to them. And I think it's important to understand that the concern might not be valid, but it's validly held by that individual person. So let's try and separate out how we are treating the individual and how we are treating the concern, because it may be that one size doesn't fit all. Record, record, record. I can never emphasize, as an employment lawyer, I can never emphasize that enough. Document everything so that if the wheel does fall off, if you are investigated by the CQC, if that knotted grievance does become an employment tribunal claim, you can back up what you've done and why. Do follow up. Don't just leave a situation treated as concluded. Check in a month's time. Are things working better? Are they working differently? Are people happy now? Is there some more work that needs to be done to keep you on the right path? And most importantly, at the bottom there, lead by example. We can't expect our staff to do certain things if we're not prepared to do them ourselves. And then wrapping up with some don'ts. And a lot of these are the flip side of what I've already discussed. So don't leave your policies to go stale. Don't leave concerns unanswered. If someone has a concern, then you need to take that seriously and address it. Don't leave stakeholders believing that their concerns are not valid. You may not accept them, but for whatever reason at that point in time, they believed it. It was something that was impacting on them, and it might also be impacting on others. Don't make inadvertent disclosures or breaches of confidentiality. Make sure that anybody part of this internal investigation process is fully aware of what their duties are, not only generally in their jobs, but also in respect of this individual process. Don't dismiss grievances, complaints and concerns too quickly. Don't treat them as, I don't believe it, and so it can't be true. Investigate, listen, talk, make this a two-way conversation street. And don't get emotionally involved in difficult conversations, particularly if you feel that you're being attacked. And so your best way of dealing with that is to attack back. And then just finally, finishing off with a couple of key takeaways, a summary really of what I've already spoken about. Firstly, early intervention can prevent those grievances, complaints and concerns becoming formal. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. We can all learn from them, and it's probably far easier to have a half-hour conversation early doors than leave it to fester when it becomes a grievance or a complaint that then takes up weeks of management time. Following a clear procedure ensures fairness and legal compliance. If we have a policy, let's follow it. If we don't follow it, and again the wheel comes off at some point in time, we may well be called on to justify why we chose to ignore our internal procedures. Handle these issues with empathy, be prepared, and most importantly, be professional. This is not personal. This is about how we are all interacting in the working environment. And if we can keep everybody happy, if we can keep our staff settled and feeling valued, then hopefully we don't get into the concerns that Lucy touched on earlier this morning. And encourage your HR managers and supervisors to develop strong communication skills and to approach grievances, complaints and concern management as an opportunity to resolve underlying workplace issues. I have already said this point a couple of times, I think, and I can't emphasize it enough. This is our first line of discovering where things are potentially going wrong in the workplace. So actually, you might learn something, and you might learn something that stops you from getting into the more difficult issues further down the line. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Jenny.
Thanks so much, Juliet. Just before I move on to my section, I think you raised some really good points that dovetail exactly into what I'm about to talk about. Juliet has highlighted these kind of grievances that can crop up in any business, but health and social care services are really a unique ecosystem. And what it means is that when employees' grievances aren't dealt with properly, there are alternative stakeholders that they can turn to, and it escalates it when it doesn't need to, just as Juliet highlighted. If it's not resolved on the ground, your employees will go to the CQC, or they will go to the local authority safeguarding team and escalate their concerns that way. What we would promote, and what I always say to clients when they're facing these types of issues, are getting feedback in the first instance, and engaging properly with grievances helps you, as Juliet has highlighted, nip it in the bud before it becomes anything. So gathering information, the positive and the negative, through formal forms, which I know Cornerstone you see tons of all the time in your practice on the ground. That can help you identify concerns before they become anything even reportable to you. So it's almost having that psychic element of preempting any issue that might grow. And I think another really good point that you raised, Julia, is people that end up in positions of management in care. Some of the people that own massive care businesses that are my clients actually started off as carers, and they get promoted and they become more talented as the years pass, but have not necessarily received any formal management training. It's not a skill that you learn typically as you would learn how to care or learn how to deliver whatever service you are delivering on the ground. So it's about making sure that the people that are becoming elevated through the ranks and will eventually be in charge of people have the right kind of training to manage people in a proper way. Because most of the cases that I see as a regulatory lawyer actually start off as problems between employees. It's unbelievable how little battles amongst the team can grow into something really big, or a really detested manager. You know, everybody turns against them, and that becomes a massive regulatory issue. Whereas making sure that things are sorted out as and when they arise, no matter how tiny, it can really pay dividends in the end. And again, record. From a regulatory perspective, I would completely echo Juliet's major point there. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And you want this evidence so that when CQC come knocking, they will ask, well, how did you deal with that complaint or grievance? You can show them exactly. Matrices that you can produce will really easily knock those concerns out of the park. So getting your house in order, employment law wise, just as Juliet has advised, really is a crucial element of your regulatory obligations. So there's a massive dovetail between our two lines of work there. So thank you so much, Juliet. That was really invaluable. Which brings us to me. Now, my original piece was called Navigating the CQC's new single assessment framework. And I've thought about it over the last week, and I was like, well, telling people how to navigate that is like giving you a map written in invisible ink and sending you off into the Amazon. So there's actually no point. It's changing every day. New information is coming out. Lots of criticisms are circling in the media and actually amongst people working at the CQC themselves. So I thought a better thing to discuss is regarding the single assessment framework, but kind of more things that I've noticed amongst clients who are dealing with a single assessment framework and other issues that are arising from a regulatory perspective outside of that. My main take home for this little piece is don't get too distracted by the changes that are happening, because in reality, the law isn't changing. There is no change in the law on how you run your business in terms of the regulatory objectives and requirements. It's simply the way that CQC are going to inspect you that has changed. So I want providers to feel reassured by that fact. And also, whilst that's all happening, it's a bit of a red herring, because CQC are still doing their other activities, really severe enforcement activities on the side. And people aren't necessarily paying attention to that because they're kind of focusing on the disarray that CQC is in at the moment. So I just wanted to do a bit of a roundup to touch on things that you should be alive to. So I don't know about you, but I've read that DASH report. I've read Professor Sir Mike Richards' report and talked about it dozens of times. We've all read information on the failings of the portal, the single assessment framework, and the fact that even our, health and social care minister regards the CQC as not fit for purpose. So something needs to change, and we're all aware of that. So what's happening is CQC has been taken to task publicly, shamed massively, and now is a time for the regulator to reflect and rebuild trust. There's a massive loss of trust within the NHS, within social care, and everybody that falls in between. The exercise of the single assessment framework hasn't really panned out, and so we now have an exercise of the CQC backpedaling, and finally taking into consideration providers' views on what's happening. So I would encourage all providers to engage with, I mean, it's a little bit after the fact, but CQC are now putting out forums so that you can feed in what you expect of a new regulatory regime. If you see people inviting you to those forums, discussions, please participate, because if you don't ask, you don't get. Highlight the things that you think do not work with the single assessment framework and suggest things that would work for your business. But what we've seen in this rollback is essentially a back to basics. CQC are drafting a brand new handbook. They already had one, but they scrapped it. So they're starting from scratch. They're going to produce something slightly different. They're reinstating the ratings characteristics, which might I add were incredibly helpful in helping you providers determine what good looked like. What did outstanding look like? That's what people are striving for. And those bullet points are targets for you to achieve. And you can specifically look at them and think, well, my service doesn't have that. What do I need to implement? Really helpful stuff. So they've realized that was a mistake and they're going to redraft it and reinstitute it. Registration. I think a couple of weeks ago it was announced that it was taking 6 months on average to register new services, which frankly is unacceptable. New services that are being purchased were waiting for these applications to go through, holding up deals, but more importantly, holding up service users from engaging in services that were highly valuable, some really specialised that can't be offered elsewhere in their local area. But now what we're seeing is an admission that the portal isn't working. Unfortunately, I've suffered that myself. And now, if you have a new application, they're allowing you to do it through the paper form, which we all know and love. And you can email it to them as we have been for years. So my next point is it is a little bit of humble pie. And I think it takes a big act of reflection to show that kind of, contrition and remorse and say, look, we got it wrong. We're going to go back and start again. Unfortunately, we could sit here all day and talk about the failings and the money that's been wasted, your time that's been wasted, learning these new systems that may or may not apply. But again, let's just focus on the law. That remains the same, and it will be until the next major change in law. In real terms, the way that the inspections are being conducted and have been for the last 6 months have a really problematic element in my view, and that's putting the onus on you and your managers to gather information and then upload it to a portal. That has to change, because I've seen emails to registered managers where there's a list of 75 bullet points and they say, okay, can you send us all of these documents? We're going to look at them off-site. It takes time to gather that documentation. It takes time to sort through it. Yes, if you have them organized correctly, it should be really simple and straightforward, but there's this creation of an arm's length method to inspection where time on the ground is reduced and things are happening away from you that you can't necessarily feed into in real time. For example, if somebody misunderstands a document or has questions, it's a to and fro of email. There really is something missing there in the personal aspect of inspection. So I do hope that that's something that the CQC addresses. But it is taking a lot of time away from the managers and staff who have to gather this, send it, and constantly answer questions rather than do it in one day when the inspector's on site and it can be done as and when. Now, that's the inspection element, but there's stuff going on alongside that hasn't changed and is actually intensifying, and this is a bit of a warning. So another law firm, Shakespeare Martineau, actually did some research and released figures recently that an increase of 700% in CQC prosecutions has been seen when comparing the period 2009 to 2013, when there were 11 prosecutions, to 2019 to 2023. So now that sounds quite confusing, but in that latter period, there were 88 prosecutions. It still isn't a lot, and I wouldn't say that they are rife, but that surge is really significant. And as a solicitor dealing with prosecutions on behalf of clients, I have also seen an increase of people being investigated by the CQC with a view to a criminal prosecution. Often it doesn't turn into one, but this is really a red alert to the fact that the CQC are looking at increasing cases of prosecution under their criminal powers. So that's looking into whether treatment was safe and whether there has been risk in cases where service users have eventually suffered harm. So just to alert you to look into prosecutions, look into any instances of concern that you've had in your practice and think, is this something that the CQC could chase up later down the line? Because they can and will. They have up to 3 years to investigate you after the date that a perceived offence happened. And also, with the kind of inconsistencies with CQC at the moment, I'm also seeing an increase in local authority reviews. What councils are saying is, well, we can't rely on CQC inspections. We haven't had this provider inspected for 5 years. We're going to really ramp up our quality assurance ourselves. So that might be through PAMs or other QA facilities, but that's somewhat of a duplicative process. On one hand, it can be positive because local authorities tend to know more on the ground about what a service is doing, so it can come out more positively, but then it can duplicate exactly what a CQC inspection would look at, which can be really frustrating. Now, that's just me rattling through the most recent concerns that I'm seeing, but my advice is just keep documenting, keep detailed notes of your records, as Charlie and Lucy have said. Make sure that you're delivering good care and documenting it consistently. So in terms of the new regime, it's ever changing. Look at the law. That has not changed. That remains the same. As long as you are compliant with the regulations, you are safe. So any questions? I think we might have time for a couple. We're running just 1 minute out. So we have one for, I would say, to Cornerstone. So are there any trends that you're seeing in what the regulator is looking at that should raise concerns with providers that they can kind of prepare for? Just in a brief nutshell, if you can, guys.
Yeah, what we've seen across quite a few providers in different locations, what CQC are looking at is medications, especially medications that relate to health conditions. So such things as laxatives, PRNs, variable doses is a big one at the moment. Then you've got weight management and how that impacts on nutritional needs. Then you've got incident management and trends. So these are the things they're looking at, and what they're big on is learning lessons from those incidents. So if you've got an incident where someone has become constipated and you've identified that their PRN protocol wasn't correct, what they want to see is that you've taken it upon yourself to actually review everybody's bowel management, or if you see that you've had someone with a fall and you're actually looking and reviewing those trends. It's all around the lessons learned and meeting those health conditions and early indicators that you're managing them. We've seen that across the board, especially I would say over the last 12 to 18 months from inspectors, and that is across the board. So it's not where someone's just filtered in on that. It's something that's in every single report.
Wow. Thank you, Charlie. Good tip. Okay. I think that's all the time that we have for today, but we're very grateful for you joining us today. This will become a series of talks that we hope to deliver. If you have any suggestions of things that you'd like to know more about from us, then please get in touch. Our contact details are here on this slide, and we would be happy to organise calls for any questions that you have that we haven't managed to answer during this session. But thank you to our speakers today for the time you've spent, and thank you so much to everybody attending. We hope to have you join us for more discussions very soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.